Hello, good evening, welcome everyone. Just as people are gathering in, we are going to be your hosts this evening. My name is Erica Lee Smith. I'm joining you tonight from London. I work for the Joint Public Issues team as digital communications intern, and I am the primary coordinator for this event. It would be super lovely if you'd like to let us know where you're joining this call from in the chat. It's really nice to have you join us this evening.
Yeah, and I echo what Erica said. I'm Kat Whitehouse. I'm also joining from London, probably different sides because it's a massive city. And I'm Faith and Action project worker for SEM. I work with students in SEM communities across the country, developing workshops on issues that matter most to them. I also work with other organisations like JPIT, who share SEM's vision for social justice, and we produce content that explores faith in action. So I feel like this fits really well. So yeah, I'm glad that Erica asked me to join for this.
In case you don't know already, JPIT is a partnership of the Baptist Union of Great Britain, the Methodist Church, and the United Reformed Church, which supports churches to work for peace and justice by engaging with public policy issues.
And SEM stands for Student Christian Movement, and it's a community of students gathered to be an inclusive, progressive, and radical approach to the Christian faith. We're really excited to host this panel tonight to explore how Gen AI intersects with justice and faith. We wanted to create a space to learn and reflect critically on this really relevant and fast changing topic. We also hope it will encourage young Christians to speak up more confidently in our churches and communities wherever we are.
Amazing. So just some quick housekeeping, just so you know, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on YouTube and hopefully as a podcast on the SEM Spotify as well after the event. Each speaker will present a 5-minute talk followed by about 20 minutes of audience questions towards the end, wrapping up by 8 p.m. with some resources and calls to action. And you're welcome to start sending your questions into the chat as we hear from our speakers, into the Q&A function, sorry, and we will start filtering them through once we get to the Q&A section. So for our first speaker this evening, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Nathan Mladin to our webinar. Thomas, if you'd just like to spotlight him and take off the screen, that'd be great. Dr. Nathan Mladin is a senior researcher at the Christian think tank Theos in London and the co-founder of Faithbase, a community and resource hub for Christian technologists based in Romania. His research, speaking and writing currently focus on the philosophical foundations and ideological matrix of AI, as well as the social impacts of AI systems. Nathan is the author of several publications, including AI and the Afterlife, From Digital Mourning to Mind Uploading, and Data and Dignity, Why Privacy Matters in the Digital Age. He is currently writing a book for Bloomsbury with the provisional title, You Are Not a Machine, Staying Human in the Age of AI. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say, Nathan. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Erica. And Kat, thank you for the generous hosting. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm going to go straight in because 5 minutes is not a lot of time, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other speakers and obviously the conversation we'll have afterwards. The media theorist Marshall McLuhan is famous for a quote you may have come across: "The medium is the message." But a lesser known, but no less potent line from McLuhan is, I think, even more relevant for our event tonight. He says, "There is no inevitability as long as there is a willingness to contemplate what is happening." And I take our conversation this evening as exactly that, our willingness to look deeply and discerningly at what is actually going on with AI, because I think one of the most concerning aspects of the current conversation about AI, and obviously we're talking about Gen AI in particular, is that we're being sold a story of inevitability. We're told, for example, that half of white-collar jobs will go in the next 1 to 5 years. That's Gary Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic. We're told that the arrival of AGI is not a question of if, but of when. And I think these narratives of inevitability, and that you could give more examples, what they do is that they remove responsibility and accountability from those in positions of power. Because if AI is inevitable, then nobody's really responsible. And what they also do, they obscure our own agency and choices, however constrained and costly those may be, because there are choices to be made. There are design choices, there are economic choices, there are business choices, there are political, regulatory choices, and there are, of course, individual choices that we can make, our choices. And once we see that AI is the result of all of these choices, questions of justice aren't far behind. Whose choices, in whose interest, and serving what vision of the human? Justice is one of these hugely complex concepts, and there are many ways to parse it, even within the Christian tradition. I like to think of justice as the active honoring of who and what God has made each creature to be. And when that honor is refused, justice is the costly work of restoring it. And I think justice begins with seeing and rightly naming all God's creatures. And this is where I want to spend the rest of my limited time, because I want to put it to you that every technology carries and reinforces, entrenches an anthropology, a vision of the human. Gen AI, I think, carries an anthropology in which the human is essentially a data generating, reference bundling system to be optimized, and in some post-humanist visions even replaced and superseded. Marvin Minsky, one of the kind of founders of AI, called the brain a meat machine and the body that bloody mess of organic matter. And I think this is the outworking, this is the working anthropology that's baked into the engineering of much of what we call AI. And this self-understanding has actually kind of seeped into the wider culture. And I won't give the examples in which we kind of think of ourselves as machines, really. In re-engineering humanity, the legal scholar Brett Frischman and the philosopher of technology, Evan Selinger, make a point that I find really clarifying. The famous question, really the whole point of the so-called Turing test, was whether machines could become indistinguishable from humans. And what Frischman and Selinger propose is to invert the test and ask whether humans, through sustained exposure to these digital algorithmic systems, are becoming indistinguishable from machines. We're becoming more predictable, therefore more manipulable, less capable and willing to do the slow work of thinking, of judging, deliberating, and relating to one another. The point is not that machines have become persons. In my view, they cannot and will never do that. The point is that we have been drifting in the other direction. We become more like machines. And the Christian scriptures identify this pattern as bound up with the logic of idolatry, which is captured in Psalm 115. Those who worship them, that is, idols, become like them. And in the biblical imagination, an idol is not a rival god. It's actually something fashioned by human hands, invested with powers and attributes it does not possess and doesn't really merit. And what an idol does, it captures the gaze of its worshiper and ultimately diminishes her. In contrast to that, an icon, and this is a distinction that is really beautifully elaborated by a continental French philosopher named Jean-Luc Marion. He says that an idol, an icon by contrast, is a window. When you look through an icon, you meet a genuine other who is calling you towards herself. And through that gaze and interaction with the other, you become more yourself. I think what we're doing with AI, both as a cultural project and in our daily use, potentially, is installing and interacting with idols, opaque mirrors that reflect a diminished version of ourselves. And I think there's lots of examples to give here. I'll pick out just two. Companion AI, marketed explicitly as a response to the loneliness epidemic. And I think young people here in particular, and I know I'm speaking to this kind of an audience here, are particularly susceptible to this marketing ploy. Half of US teenagers report using AI companions, and a third say they've used them for emotional support or romantic role playing. And here in the UK, nearly a quarter of children aged 9 to 17 use companion bots. You might be some of these people. And as one user put it, because there's no one else. And I think this is the tragedy of the moment. I won't give you the figures, but basically the artificial intimacy economy is already valued at 2.25 billion and projected to go beyond 12 billion by 2033. And I think the same pattern shows up in the way kind of we're relating to AI assistants, whether ChatGPT or another chatbot or AI agents. The more we use them to to think, to write, to judge, the less we trust. I'm very sorry. The less we trust our own capacity, our natural capacity to do those things. The MIT scholar Sherry Turkle has a really good line that captures this dynamic. We've come to expect more and more from technology and less from each other. And I would add, and less from ourselves. This is why I think the anthropological impact, before we get to the social impact of AI, how it's negatively shaping the way we understand ourselves, who we are, and what we are, and how we flourish, is a question of justice. Because if justice is actively honoring what God has made each person to be, systems that train us to see ourselves and each other as less than what we are ultimately systems of injustice. And I'm coming into close here. But precisely because AI is pushing us to ask these questions, I think there is an opening. Because for much of the last century, the anthropologies humming behind our public life have been sort of implicit and unexamined. And I think AI is just forcing us to really reckon with the question, what is a person? What is thinking? What is the value of our attention? What is a relationship? What is a friend? And people are asking these questions with real skin in the game because real lives are being reshaped and there is a real danger that real livelihoods will be discarded. And I think Christians have something very specific to offer in this moment, a substantial, a nuanced vision of what human beings are and what they're made for. That we have intrinsic dignity, that we are worthy and loved regardless of our ability to generate economic value, that we have agency, that we are fulfilled in relationships of mutual trust and giving, that the soul is not just an antiquated metaphor, but actually something real. We should reclaim it. The irreducible center of a person that renders each of us as someone rather than something, and not simply a kind of a sequence of experiences. So I'm not the first to say that we are in a crisis of meaning, and I think Gen AI is likely deepening it. But we are also at a time of great curiosity, I think, and of spiritual openness. And I think the opportunity is to speak into this moment with confidence, with nuance, with love, and to offer the moral, spiritual, and practical resources of our tradition into a conversation that will be had with or without us about what it means to be human and what do we owe each other. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nathan. That's such a great start, and particularly drawing on those philosophical reflections. So thank you. I'd like to pass over now to Anissa, who is our next speaker. Anissa Latouche is the Vice Chair of the National Youth Technology Council, where she worked closely with the Department for Education to formulate and implement an AI safety toolkit rolled out to schools nationally in autumn 2025. She's the youngest member of the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioners Independent Scrutiny and Oversight Board, where she provides scrutiny and accountability regarding police powers and procedures, including live facial recognition technology. Her journey began as a digital investigator for Amnesty International, where she verified human rights violations. And whilst reading geography at the University of Cambridge, she focused on the impact of AI on human rights and civil liberties before pursuing postgraduate law. She is currently training to be a barrister and regularly engages in work and research involving AI and human rights. Anissa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Erica, for the introduction, and thank you so much, Nathan, as well, for everything you said. It was incredibly illuminating. I will be focusing a bit more on the law and AI from a legal perspective, and then also how being a Christian has influenced my perspective on AI. So I became interested in AI actually from studying geography at undergraduate. And that was because whilst I was studying topics such as citizenship, I came across concepts such as the biometric border or surveillance technology, which can sound like very abstract terms, but are ultimately about machine learning models and automated digital systems being used to process the data of ordinary people to achieve the means of border enforcement or policing or even violence. And so it was the first time that I really had to ask myself the question, so what, when it came to AI? And that's kind of what has led me down this legal human rights path when it comes to AI and justice. For me, a big part of it was exploring the biases, the inaccuracies, and the hallucinations that can be produced by AI, which can ultimately make it unreliable and unsafe for already very vulnerable groups in society, such as women, people of colour, and the marginalised in different parts of the world. I explored AI through a few avenues initially. The first was actually very interesting and it leads me on to the rest. And it was the hidden labor behind AI. So, something that comes up a lot in conversation around AI is the fact that we're all going to lose our jobs one day because of it. However, through my research, I was the ways that the labour landscape isn't going to just be obliterated by AI, but is going to be changed. And part of that change will be increased exploitation of labour in order to maintain AI and through training and moderating, etc. And there was a really interesting frontier on the legal landscape in which class action lawsuits were starting to happen because of the capture tests. So most of you have probably at some point been asked by Facebook or Google or Gmail or whatever it is to verify that you're a human. And to do that, you'll usually have to identify where the fire hydrant is in a picture, or which ones are buses and not cars, etc. And it came to light that that data was actually being sold to train drones to more accurately identify targets in war zones. So it was just one example of the ways that we don't actually always know how our data is being used, and that our data can sometimes be used to train automated systems. So that opened me up to AI and human rights, specifically looking at crimes against humanity and how AI can be instrumental to the deaths of innocent civilians in conflict zones. For instance, you may be aware of the spy tech firm Palantir. They've been in the news a lot recently. They handle NHS data. They've been contracted to store that data. However, you may be less aware of the fact that they have also been instrumental in the conflict going on in Gaza right now, to the extent that they have pioneered something called the Lavender system, which was used by the IDF to identify militants. However, it has a 10% inaccuracy rate, which meant that it was actually 10% of the time identifying everyday civilians as bomb targets, which is chilling and terrifying. And so it was just one of the other examples of the way that AI is being directly used to threaten people's human rights and their lives. Another thing I've looked at is data privacy and racial bias. So one of the very key rulings has been to do with South Wales Police's use of automated facial recognition technology and how it breaches our rights to privacy. You may or may not have known about Notting Hill Carnival, one of the biggest celebrations in summer in the UK. It was a frontier for live facial recognition technology to be rolled out, but because of the biases that are inherent in AI, particularly racial biases, This Black majority event resulted in a 98% inaccuracy rate in the police identifying people as potential suspects using it. And so it poses a really great threat to people's safety and peace and right to privacy. I also found it really interesting, actually, as Nathan was talking about companion AI and loneliness, and the fact that a quarter of children in the UK aged 9 to 17 do use companion bots because unfortunately, the way that companion AI operates is very underregulated, and it has recently resulted in the deaths of some young people by suicide. And it's often a way that a mechanism people do use when they feel like they have no one to talk to. And so a legal issue that I think is really pertinent is the AI liability gap, in the sense that the law currently doesn't provide a means for families to be able to hold AI companies to account for these deaths. And so I think it's again a really important thing that we start talking about. So why does being a Christian influence my perspectives on AI, and why is it important? There's four main reasons for me. The first is that as Christians, we're called to justice and to love our neighbours. And so it means that we should be concerned about the ways that others are persecuted. I personally feel that Christians have been such a key element of justice historically, and I'm really proud of that. If we look at the Quakers and the abolition movement, or more recently, the International Justice Mission and the work they do for anti-trafficking and modern slavery. And so I think this is another frontier that is so important for Christians to be vocal about. We're also called to be stewards of the earth. You may not be aware about the environmental impacts of AI, that data centers can cause huge droughts. And in fact, a city in Mexico recently had the worst drought that they've had in a century because of AI data centers and how much water they need to cool the technology and the equipment that they use. And then to wrap up, I think that it's also really important to remember the creativity and the gifts and the talents that we've been created with, that we've been created in God's image, and we've been created to love and to feel and to think and to create. And I worry that AI can separate us from that. And then finally, I think it can also end up separating us from community and from God as well, because I think that in ways, by relying on AI to be our companion or to be the answer when we feel that we don't have an answer, it separates us from actually praying about things or leaning on the community that we've been given. And I think that it's really important, actually, that when we feel anxious or confused or any of these things, that we're actually relying on each other, and going back to that. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anissa. Such a different presentation, but so useful. I know we've spoken before about some of those issues, and it's great to hear that. So next, our third speaker is going to be Izzy May Solomon. Izzy May Solomon is project coordinator at the Immersive Technology Lab, University of Cambridge, and is a researcher for the AI Working Group for the Methodist Church in Great Britain. Her background in philosophy grounds much of her work within the ethics of AI, having focused on ethics and history and philosophy of science during her Cambridge undergraduate degree. She undertook a master's at the University of Edinburgh in data and artificial intelligence ethics, with her dissertation completed in collaboration with the Methodist Church. So Izzy, over to you.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much for having me, and I've really been enjoying hearing everything that's been shared already, so thank you so much for sharing that. So I'm Izzy, and my research explores how members of the Methodist Church in Britain perceive the ethical and the theological implications of artificial intelligence. So my project used a mixed method approach. So we had surveys and interviews, and we also had a participatory textile artifact, which might be shared on the screen. I don't know if you can see it, but it should be there. At its core, my work asked how faith communities are responding to AI already, and what concerns are emerging when people are reflecting on it in relation to justice, creation, care, trust, and human dignity. So we were able to gather just under 300 responses from a really broad range of Methodists from all sort of roles and ages, not just ministers, not just local preachers, just everyday Methodists as well. And it was enough that we were able to have a broadly representative view of the wider Methodist population, which was amazing. And this really matters because the project that I undertook itself was sort of a kind of justice, because I wanted to ask people, I wanted to listen seriously, I wanted us to discern together, and rather than just assume that these questions were being tackled by expert or belonged just to experts to ask and to answer. So what you're seeing right now is my artifact, which reflects this sort of commitment. It's a textile tree that's made up of 765,108, they're all important, stitches, and over 100 embroidered leaves. So each one carries the words of a participant that I worked with. And the theological reflection is something that doesn't just happen in books or in lecture halls. It's something that happens in prayers, in our conversations, in the shared life of our communities. And so this work tries to bring that all together into view and recognise this as a theological insight in their own right, in a way that is easy to engage with in a church setting, which is why it has a very particular look to it. The colours of the leaves sort of mark the themes such as authenticity and worship, trust and distrust, responsibility of churches, and hope for creative uses of artificial intelligence. There's some empty leaves as well there that sort of remind us our conversation isn't finished yet. And when it goes on tour to places, it goes along with some paper leaves so people can reflect, even though that work is finished, because it creates sort of a space for sort of communal conversations. I'm just going to talk through a couple of my findings from my research. So a lot of my quantitative findings were that people really valued compassion and stewardship of the environment, which is really, really important because it shows that respondents weren't just asking if AI is useful, but sort of the kind of moral use that we want to help create. And then we had a lot of people, over 80% wanted to learn more, and they were really concerned about the environmental impacts and the justice concerns in relation to that. So that combination is really reassuring to sort of hear that people aren't indifferent, they're concerned, they want better language, they want better resources and support to think well. A lot of people in their qualitative responses also spoke about how the church shouldn't just be discerning internally, but it should be speaking prophetically in a public square. Many respondents really felt that the harms of AI are too great for us to just stand by and do nothing, and they really urged the church to set an example. And this got me thinking about epistemic injustice, which I studied as part of my ethics component of my undergrad. Epistemic injustice, put very quickly and very poorly, is Miranda Fricker's concept that there is such a thing as a wrong that can be done to someone in their capacity as a knower. So this can be testimonial injustice, which is where someone's voice is undervalued, perhaps because of a perception that we have about them. So you might hear a slight Welsh twang to my voice and completely just throw away everything I have to say because of that, for instance. I hope not. And then there's hermeneutical, which is when people just lack a shared language or a concept to be able to make sense of and explain what they're experiencing. So the clearest example of this came to me in an encounter with a woman who's a lifelong Methodist, very warm, very thoughtful, and she told me that she'd used ChatGPT to generate all of her prayers for various interactions because she didn't want to embarrass anyone by giving a really jumbled prayer. And that really stuck with me because that was a real anxiety that she might be too messy, too unpolished, that she might be too inadequate. And that really got to the heart of what I've been talking about, because justice and compassion and stewardship and making room for human voices is so important. Prayer, in my opinion, doesn't need to be impressive. It's meant to not be perfectly ordered or polished. It's meant to be honest. It's meant to be really relational, and it's meant to be ours. And so that moment really reframed the project, because it suggested to me that a really subtle impact of AI might not just be that we're automating all of our tasks, but that we are reshaping what we think good human actions look like. So I'm going to wrap up in a second, but I just want to offer an invitation that going forward, maybe if we get something wrong, maybe our words might come out a bit jumbled, or our prayers or our reflections feel a bit unfinished. Perhaps resist seeing that as a failure, perhaps see it as sort of a reminder to ourselves and to everyone else around us that it's all right not to have the right words immediately. If this research has shown me anything, it's that good discernment doesn't begin with polish. It begins with a lot of honesty, a lot of community, and a lot of courage to be able to speak. And that's what my survey revealed. That's what my qualitative findings called for. And it's what the artifact tries to make visible as well. We are wonderfully made, not because we're polished, but because we're relational, we're interpretive, we're morally accountable. And so I think when I think about AI and justice, my hope is that we protect not only what is efficient or useful, but we think about what is vulnerable and communal and deeply human. And we try and keep making room for messy, meaningful voices to be heard, because that's just so deeply important to everything that I've been working on at the moment. So yeah, that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Izzy. That's so great to hear all about that project, and that artifact looks absolutely amazing. I know you've mentioned it to me before, but I don't think I'd seen an image. So that's beautiful. So our final speaker, now moving swiftly on, is Kester Bruin. Kester Bruin is Associate Director at the Institute for the Future of Work, a research and development institute exploring how AI and automation technologies are impacting the labour market in the UK. He is also an author of several books on the intersections of theology, technology and social history, including most recently Godlike, a 500-year history of artificial intelligence in myths, machines and monsters. So Kester, over to you.
Thank you so much, and really, really fantastic to have heard the presentations so far. So I'm Kester, Associate Director at the Institute for the Future of Work, and also an author. One of the recent pieces of work we did was looking at the impact of generative AI on the novel, and it really kind of speaks to those questions of creativity and what it means to be human. The reason I wrote the book, 500-Year History of AI, is kind of trying to understand, like, where in the human heart has this technology come from? Because if we can understand that, then we can think about, okay, how might we get this right in the future? And you know, I think very key to that, to kind of start with a theological point, is, you know, when Martin Luther like nails his 95 Theses to the door of a church in Wittenberg, this signals like a major theological shift in European thinking within the Reformation. But that shift was also one and the same, tied up with a technological one, with no printing press, invented just decades before. There's no Reformation, there's no theological shift, and you know that these are tied together with Enlightenment too. The point I want to make about that is because we've been here before with these technological revolutions, and we've got to understand what the impacts are going to be, not just in terms of tools, but in terms of the impact on us as people. We could see the same, like in the Industrial Revolution, you know, in England. You don't get that Industrial Revolution without some kind of socio-theological support that sees the labour, the hard labour of poor people, as somehow sanctifying. Just as you can't get like a technology of plantation slavery without a theology that sees somehow those slaves as less than human. These are all kind of tied together, social, technological, justice elements. Now, that's not to argue that somehow that technology is spiritual, as it were, but it is to propose that all technologies always have kind of emerged in a socio-cultural context, and that the meta-narratives, as Nathan has talked about, these like perhaps invisible belief structures that frame people's lives, are the forge within which all technologies are shaped. So I've been really, really interested in the book to say, you know, what is it? Where in the human heart has this come from? And actually, if you look at, you know, the words of Elon Musk and others, they are all speaking in theological language. The title of the book, Godlike, actually comes from Ian Hogarth, who was the UK government's lead on AI safety. He wrote a piece for the Financial Times back in, it's like April 2023, saying, "We must pause the race towards godlike AI." Now, that's literally where the book came from. I was sitting there thinking, hold on a minute, you know, like which God? And in which ways, like which God, you define your theological terms. But it struck me looking back that actually, if you go back, so much of our technological history is also that theological history. So just in short, and this informs the writing that I've done, but also everything that we do at the Institute, we need, when we're thinking about this, a socio-technical approach, as we would say at the Institute. But that means a kind of socio-theological approach as well. All tech is social, and all technologies impact how we interact as a society, as Anissa has pointed out so brilliantly, and Izzy has too. And that means that all technologies have got a justice element because they're all about how we live and work and communicate together. When that printing press is invented, that fundamentally changes the ways that we're able to communicate. It is able to mediate our presence much more easily over long distances. Same with the telephone. It changes how we act together. My hunch is we're going to look back at this period of the adoption of generative AI tools and see it in the same way as like we do the Reformation or the Industrial Revolution, not just as a new technology, but part of a wider shift in ontology, in community and labor and belief. And it's just fundamentally important we don't make the same mistakes in terms of slowness to react as we did back then. With the Industrial Revolution, it's out of that we see the creation of trades unions and other things which the church is intimately involved in. But it took too long, and a lot of people got hurt in the process. So one of the things I just wanted to finish with was to go back, to step back from AI and think, well, what is a much more simple technology? And the one that I've talked about before and spoken about in the book is if we imagine a hammer. Now, I can't press nails into a wall using my thumb, but with a hammer, I am able to do that. And this is what all technologies do. They amplify our ability to act in the world. They allow us to do things that we weren't able to do, and similarly, we're able to fly and we're able to kind of, send messages across the world. But also what the hammer does, other than amplifying my ability to act in the world, it reaches back through the heart, through the arm and into the heart and says, what do you want to do with that extra power? And this is the part of tech that we just don't get, and that we get a bit kind of taken aback by, because we don't do that proper questioning of what are we going to do with that extra power. In fact, if you've seen the film Oppenheimer a couple of years ago, that's exactly what this film was about. It's saying this profoundly new and incredibly powerful, existentially powerful technology of nuclear weapons. It forced people to say, hold on a minute, what the heck are we going to do with this new power? And thankfully, to a point, those questions were asked, and there was, some elements of kind of pause on that. We've got to do that same on AI. But the fundamental thing is, it is not called big tech for nothing. So you cannot do those questions on your own. There is no point saying, oh, I'm going to use my phone a bit less, or I'm going to do this, because the tech is too big. It is absolutely sprawling. We've got to do that together. And that's why, as other contributors have already said, this is why we've got to reinvest in our institutions. In fact, interestingly, one of the papers we published recently at the Institute is saying the future of work, and this is a focus on work, but it speaks to all of our lives, is not predetermined by technologies. It is shaped by institutions. We've got to retain that agency. And interestingly, one of the books I talk about in my work is by the political scientist Robert Putnam, who wrote a book in just at the end of the 1990s, early 2000s, called Bowling Alone. And what he noticed, having moved back to the States, more people were going 10-pin bowling than ever before, but fewer people were bowling in bowling leagues. In other words, the activities are still happening, but we're all fragmented and atomized in that. And that is disempowering to those institutions. The double danger of that is we need those institutions to do that work of reflection on technology. But because those institutions are so eroded, that is actually now doubly difficult to do. What I'm encouraged by, though, recently is that, it's taken too long, but we're finally beginning to do that with social media. We're beginning to see, now hold on a second, this wasn't a great idea. Like, we actually need to do something different here. But how is that happening? It's happening in schools, it's happening with groups of parents, it's happening at the kind of regulatory level. it is not work to ask people to do that alone. We have to do that together. We've got to engage in that. And I would say that one of the key structures by which we need to do that work of reflection, that might be a trades union. It might be, a kind of worker council, as is much more common in places like Germany. But it also needs to happen in these churches, because these are institutions where people don't choose your neighbors, but you are, kind of cross-demographic, cross-cultural, all of those. And it is there that we need to come together and say, how are we going to use the power of these new technologies? Not to reject them out of hand. That would be absurd. It's completely ridiculous to say, oh, I'm going to reject technology. You'd have to reject clothes, you'd have to reject language, you'd have to reject everything. We've got to be thoughtful about our tech use, and we've got to do that together. Thank you.
Thank you for all of our speakers. I really enjoyed listening to them. I personally have learned a lot, so I'm sure other people have as well. We're going to have about 50 minutes of Q&A now. I've got a few questions already, but I'm just going to start with one I've got here, and then I'll go on to the chat because Tom's sending them through. Thought this would be a good intro question. So, if AI creates injustice, should Christians boycott it or use it for good? If anyone wants to come in on that.
I mean, I would say one of the things that you'll hear talk about quite a bit is Kranzenberg's first law of technology, which says technology is neither good nor bad, neither is it neutral. So in one sense, we need to be very thoughtful about our use of AI, and that includes the ecological implications, but none of that is particularly simple. But we do need to have that kind of rich, deep dive. It worries me when I speak to firms who say we are never going to use AI. That I think is a regressive thing. What we do need to do is to think about it thoughtfully, and what is the impact on people going to be? Because very often across the whole AI value chain, as others have already said, there are massive impacts on those that we can't necessarily see. Those, where are the rare earth minerals coming from? Where are the kind of data centers being built? Where are the kind of droughts, et cetera, et cetera? So there are so many different impacts.
Yeah, just to come in on that as well, I think that given everything that I had spoken about, and also everything that Kester's just said as well, I don't think that you can necessarily tell anyone just cut out, what has become a really big part of your life. But I do think that the way that I look at AI is quite similar to the way that I look at, for instance, I remember being in school, the big issue at the time was sweatshops and clothing supply chains and the ethics involved in that, and the really big push for people to stop shopping fast fashion, for example, and to start going to charity shops. And the goal was almost to stop sourcing your clothes from companies where you knew it was unethical, but in reality that is pretty hard, and I think that most of us have quite mixed wardrobes when it comes to that. And so I think that for me, I think that the more realistic advice is to just be mindful, and the same way that we apply ethical usership and consumption to other parts of our lives, I think it's really important with this. I think do a personal self-assessment. If you can go without it, go without it. And if you can't, I think really reflect on the reasons why, and see where you can reduce that. I think that also it's quite nuanced in regards to what you use AI for and the types of AI that you're using. I think more the risks and the harms are much more explicit, and so there's a bigger case for I don't know if the word is boycott, but definitely to maybe eliminate that from your use. And yeah, so I think it's about balance and ethics and self-reflection.
Does anyone else want to speak on this, or should we move on to another one? Okay, cool. So I've got another question for everybody, and then I've got two specific ones for Izzy and Anissa. So the question for all the panelists is, Christian leaders, perhaps especially Pope Leo, have made several statements on AI. Is it helpful for faith leaders to speak about AI? Does it help Christian engagement on the issues? What do you think? What would you like Christian leaders to say that they haven't already said?
I'll go. I think it's absolutely important, but it has to be done well. And that's obviously to say something very banal, but I think it's time to say something more granular, more concrete than just kind of the general cliche kind of statements, and really like address specific injustices and bad use cases and kind of problematic dynamics. And I think the Pope has been doing that and will do that. In fact, I'm kind of on tenterhooks waiting for that encyclical, which is a kind of the tradition of the church to be speaking on social issues, and there are very good reasons to believe that the Pope's next encyclical will be on AI, or rather on the theological anthropology. And the title it's a rumor title, but I think it's going to be something like Magnificat Humanitas, the magnificent humanity, kind of reasserting the value of the human person. So yes, definitely there is an opening, there is a hunger for deeper, richer accounts of what it means to be human, what it means to relate to one another, and I think there is an opportunity to do that. But again, concrete, very very specific, rather than just pious kind of bromides.
That's a really good point. Does anybody else?
Sorry, I was just wondering if someone
Go
else
ahead.
wanted to come in. I think there's something really interesting here about the specific issue here that we've given a machine language, or the imitation of language, and there's something, there's this kind of reverse Promethean act. Prometheus stealing fire from the gods and like giving us creativity and language, and basically that fire has been stolen from each of us, whether you're a writer or whatever you've written on Facebook or whatever, in order to give machines language. And the problem with that is that these language models are then becoming things that are almost more trusted. I mean, the woman who said that she used it to write her prayers, and I know that Pope Leo mentioned, that priests shouldn't use it to write their homilies. I was at an event in Bournemouth actually a few months ago, and it was a young graduate who'd kind of finished university and now got a job working in the creative sector, creating content for an organization. And he said, I'm not going to lie, like I trust AI to create better content than I do. That was extraordinary. And there's a real gasp in the room, but we could totally understand that. And the problem there is, it's like, well, you are already replaced. I mean, so you've got to find that way to be human. And part of that is rediscovering how large language is. Because we found ourselves, as Nathan said, being reduced in terms of our language because we are becoming more machine-like. So the question is, what are you going to do to become more human? And that does not mean becoming more efficient, more productive, whatever. So I would really like to see an understanding from all of those in power speaking to what it means to be more human rather than what it means to be more productive and more kind of economically active.
I think that's really, really powerful to think about. I've got a similar question. It's on a similar theme for Anissa. Someone's asked, has anyone in your kind of legal experience, has anybody tried to use AI in the courtroom? And how do you think AI will influence courtrooms in the next 15 years? How should Christian barristers and lawyers navigate to use this ethically?
That is a brilliant question, and a very pertinent one that I've been having a lot of conversations about actually for the past year or so now. So the answer is yes. There have been multiple cases that have sent shockwaves through the court world, really, where barristers have been found using AI to in their submissions, and the way that they've been caught out is because the cases were fake, and so AI had hallucinated, and of course, yeah, those were picked up by opposing counsel and by judges alike. What are my views on it? I struggle with welcoming AI into the law space because of the reasons that I spoke about earlier, the biases, the inaccuracies, and the fact that it can hallucinate as well, which is really crucial when it comes to people's lives and justice and fairness. I think that AI is being adopted by lawyers, and that's definitely happening when it comes to doing simple tasks like drafting and research, etc. There's actually a law firm, the first of its kind in the UK, called Garfield AI, and they now use an automated system for small debt claims. So they are the first technical AI legal service in the UK. When it comes to courtrooms, there have been conversations around whether, for instance, judges should be replaced by AI in small claims cases, cases with a value of £5,000 or less. But I think that, again, we start to walk into really difficult territory, because if we acknowledge that there are issues with AI, which mean that it's not suitable for larger scale cases, why do those involved in lower value cases deserve to have their cases heard in that way? Again, going back to human rights, our Article 6 right to a fair trial is entrenched, and it's really important. And it's that protects people from being guaranteed a hearing that's independent and impartial, where judges evaluate credibility and nuance and context in a manner that I don't think AI would be able to do, and it would lead to a lot of unfair and very unjust outcomes that would mostly impact people that are already subject to bias. And so we'd be moving in the wrong direction in the justice system. How do I think lawyers and barristers should respond to it and deal with these issues and navigate their work ethically? I mean, law is a perfect profession, and it's made up of people who care about ethics and also love to have an opinion on something. And so I think it's really leaning into those strengths that will actually help barristers and lawyers to navigate this. I think it's really important to not get swayed by the tide. Going back to the conversations we've already been having around humanity, it's also a profession that's made up of perfectionists and overachievers and people who compare themselves to each other. And even for myself, I've had to really come to peace and give myself grace for the fact that maybe AI would be able to do this task in a tenth of the time, but actually I would rather take the time to do it and do it well and do it thoroughly. And so I think it's really important to for lawyers to remember that, to also be vocal about these topics, that when they are being discussed and debated, to actually speak up about them the same way that we're seeing with a lot of barristers speaking out against the jury trial reforms right now. And so, yeah, I think also just sticking to the things that we already do well. I don't fix something that's not broken. If you feel overwhelmed with the task, delegate. That there's definitely become something that gets in the way of the integrity of the law.
Amazing. Tessa, did you have something you wanted to say on that? Because your hand's up.
Yeah, just very quickly. It was just my background was in teaching mathematics, actually, and famous mathematician Bertrand Russell. He was trying to understand how it is that we can distinguish this, to do with kind of group theory. But he came up with two sorts of knowledge that we need. One is descriptive knowledge, and this is, let's say you could go on University Challenge and answer every single question about Taylor Swift. Like, you could be said to know Taylor Swift, like you knew every possible fact about her. And I don't know anything about Taylor Swift, but I don't even know if she's got a sister. But if Taylor Swift had a sister, she might not be able to answer all those questions, but she knows her. And that is knowledge of acquaintance. Those are two very different types of knowledge. This is back in the 1920s. What AI does, it uses vast amounts of descriptive knowledge to do an impersonation of acquaintance. It is trying to do that acquaintance, and it's trying to fool us in that. It's not that it will never be able to do that. And that acquaintance idea of knowledge of other people is fundamentally important when it comes to justice, because this is about person to person. People have said to me, do you think AI will ever write a great novel? I don't care. I actually, like, well done, great trick. I do not care. What doesn't, and it was like this thing about robots beating people in a Boston Marathon. I don't care. A car can beat you in a marathon. These machines, they will be able to do these things. It doesn't matter. We've got to emphasize that knowledge of acquaintance and not be fooled into thinking everything is about descriptive data points.
I think I could talk about this all day. I feel like you've got so much amazing things to share. I just really wanted to ask really quickly, Izzy, just was there a rationale between your mixed method in your artifact? Just kind of, very briefly, I'm conscious of time. Just could you share that?
Yeah. So I really wanted to get a mixed method, because asking people to tick a box is really well and good, up to a point, because if someone tells me that they are concerned about AI in the environment, I don't know if they're talking about data centers. I don't know if they're talking about climate change. If they're telling me that they think the church should do more, I need to know what they mean. So having that section where people could just throw everything they had at me and give me either 2 words or in some cases hundreds of words was so important. But I also needed a way of quickly sort of marrying up and showing what the overall trends were, which the quantitative is able to provide me with much more. So the mix was really important, because I wanted to be able to display that people weren't just ticking boxes, they were having real nuanced thought, and I really wanted to bring that to the working group, and say, this is what people are thinking, this is really important, we should be talking about this, and we should be basing our report around this. So I hope that sort of answers the right sort of angle of what that question about the mixed method was trying to get at. But that's why I think it's really important to sort of have both sides of things. It does make for a lot more work, but it's definitely worth it.
Amazing. Thank you so much to our panelists. It's been such a great opportunity to hear all of your valuable and very different contributions. Thomas, if you can just put up the closing slide very quickly, that would be great. So just a couple of things to mention before we close the session. We are now putting a link into the chat of a survey, a really short survey. If you identify as a young adult or a young person and you've come along today, I'd really appreciate you taking 2 minutes to share your feedback and your general feelings about AI as a justice issue, which will be anonymous, but will be incorporated as part of our research into youth perspectives on AI. It's so great to see so many people asking really interesting questions and being passionate about this issue, and obviously our speakers with all their experience as well. And in the form, you can also indicate if you'd like to be involved in more detailed follow-up conversations about AI, or you can reach out to us on our email, hello@jpit.uk, or DM us on Instagram. You might feel called to respond to AI and justice issues in a number of ways after this session, but we wanted to quickly on this slide signpost some potential ideas. After the webinar, we will be collating some of these into a resource on the JPIT website, which we will share as a way for you to continue your learning. And obviously, we'd particularly recommend you check out any of the published works from our speakers this evening, including some which are on the screen now. But now, very kindly, Frida from Pull the Plug, who I believe is currently on the call, has agreed to briefly introduce their campaign and how you might want to get involved in that as another option.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me.
I'm aware we're already at 8, so I don't want to speak for too long. But I think, yeah, it was really interesting to hear what all of the speakers had to say. And the thing that, I was really like, yes, this is so true, is when Kester was talking about how, like, we're facing big tech here, and we're not going to change anything about big tech if we try to take little individual actions about whether I use ChatGPT today or not. So a friend of mine called Harry, who's from the film industry, who's been seeing these sort of editing rooms that he was working in being cut down more and more. And my background is in climate campaigning. I think maybe needless to say why I have questions about the way AI is rolled out right now. We came together late last year because it just felt like everyone was talking about AI, like people on this call. Everyone has something that they're annoyed about, or that they're at least very worried about. And there's this great overarching sense that the wrong people are getting to decide right now what AI looks like and how it is used, where you have these big tech companies, a lot of which have CEOs in charge who, like, frankly say stuff like they say it on public, and you're like, I can't believe you just said that out loud. And these are the people who are designing right now what this looks like. And like some of the speakers had said, there's a huge moment right now that we're probably going to remember for quite a while to come, where we still have a choice over what AI looks like and how we use it. And if we don't organize as people, the wrong people are going to get the say in what AI looks like, and it's going to be big corporations that basically are completely going to dominate that choice. So Harry and I decided that we wanted to just bring together people, organize people to take small acts of resistance together against what is a slightly insane rollout of AI right now, where it's in every area of your life, whether you want it or not, and where it's done at the cost of things that we really value in our lives. We organized the biggest protest on AI in UK history, which is a very low bar, but we have organized it at the end of February, which was really amazing. It got some media attention. We have another big protest coming out, which we can't announce yet, but it's probably going to be in relation to Palantir and the NHS. And it just really, really feels like right now is such a moment where it really matters that politicians can see it's not just a couple of people ranting on Twitter. There are real people who are really annoyed with how AI is being used in this country right now, and they're going to shout on the street, and they're going to contact their MPs, and they're not just going to sit by and watch this unfold. So we have, I think maybe in the follow-up email, some links to the campaign are going to be shared. I can't put them into the chat right now, but we already have little chapters in London, Oxford, Cardiff, and hopefully soon Manchester. There's also some community groups, like there's a group for academics and students. There could be a group for Christians. We would love to see Christians pull the plug. And what we're really trying to work towards is some kind of big coalition where, like, all those groups who for various reasons are annoyed with AI right now come together, because that is really what we need in order to challenge the huge power that big tech companies are. So we would love you to join us, join Pull the Plug. And yeah, thanks so much for putting the link into the chat, and hopefully see you soon on the streets. That's me. Amazing. Thank you so much. It's great to have an opportunity to point towards something tangible that's happening so that people can go away from the webinar and get involved however they feel able to. So just to close, I'm going to read a very short prayer, which is taken from the World Council of Churches website from their symposium in 2021, which was around communication as a justice tool in their prayer resource. So let's pray together while we're here. Lord Jesus, we pray and ask for God's heart for promoting life and justice for and with all people and leaders creating and using digital technology. We pray for a digital space that is rooted and grounded in the sacred human identity of being made in the image of God. We pray that God would renew the minds of all engaged in digital communications and AI governance to be led by the Spirit, which promotes life and peace, and to have a good spirit of wisdom and revelation in their decision-making as it impacts all of creation, human and non-human. Amen.